From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South, and I'm Jose Daniel Lopez. The Angostura 2019 military exercises have begun in Venezuela. They aim to test the operational and technical capabilities of the Bolivarian National Armed Forces. Preparations have been ongoing since January, which have been supervised by the President and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, Nicolás Maduro. In an international news conference, President Maduro said that he's open to dialogue and supports the Montevideo mechanism.
I'm prepared to have a dialogue with whoever, whatever, whenever, right now, through me or by special representatives. Secondly, the negotiation. I'm ready to negotiate. Politics is negotiation. You propose, I propose, and that way we talk and advance. I can agree or not, but we advance. Thirdly, commitment, the construction of agreements. I'm ready to write agreements for peace in Venezuela now. I'm ready. I have always been ready. Fourthly, the implementation of commitments always established in any agreement. Venezuela subscribes to and joins the call for the Montevideo mechanism.
The Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador has said that humanitarian aid should be available to all the countries of the world that need it, without any political interest behind it.
I'm in favor of humanitarian aid, not only to Venezuela but also to Haiti and to all poor and abandoned countries, to millions of Mexicans who suffer from hunger, millions of human beings in the world who suffer from hunger. I am in favor of humanitarian aid. However, I consider it should not be mixed with any political interests.
López Obrador also spoke about the need to respect the self-determination of Venezuelan people, that any humanitarian aid for the country should be carried out by the United Nations.
Any humanitarian aid should be carried out and distributed by the United Nations. They are responsible for helping the world. They should be in charge of helping the people, without political interest and the use of violent attacks.
For some time now, the opposition in Venezuela has been constantly talking about humanitarian aid for the nation. On February 2nd, a spokesperson announced the aid's arrival.
Next Tuesday, aid will arrive to the Colombian city of Cúcuta. We expect more aid to arrive at the border with Brazil. We are seeing a lot of goodwill from nations that want to help with the humanitarian crisis we are living in Venezuela.
But neither the Red Cross nor the United Nations were willing to sponsor this aid, which appears to be an endorsement that President Nicolás Maduro is legitimate.
To provide humanitarian aid, you have to work directly with the Red Cross. No one from the opposition, not even Juan Guaidó, made a formal request for this aid. The only person who did so was Mike Pompeo in the United States. On top of this, according to international law, to request humanitarian aid, the receiving party must give permission. In this case, the government of Venezuela.
History dictates that U.S. interventions in Yugoslavia, Iraq, Libya and many other countries have been catastrophic with the wholesale destruction of a nation-state. The Venezuelan government has always maintained that there are economic hardships largely imposed by U.S. sanctions, but denies a humanitarian crisis.
This humanitarian aid is a wartime strategy that is added to the ongoing attacks by the U.S. government, which wants to bring the country to its knees. They want to come here and take control of the country, dividing it up, like in Iraq and Libya, and just like they tried to do in Syria, but failed.
In comparison to other countries, Venezuela has one of the lowest foreign debts in the world.
If we take a look at what's happening internationally with the theft of Venezuelan funds and resources by the US and the UK, they are going to use our money to pay off their own debts. This is the same strategy they use in Libya.
Venezuela has asked the US to unfreeze its accounts. Currently, $23 billion are frozen, according to the Venezuelan foreign minister when he spoke at the UN.
This so-called aid they want to give us amounts to nothing but spare change. We don't need their pity. We have our own money. We have money to pay our debts. By blockading us, they want to be in control of how we can buy the things we need.
The government of Nicolas Maduro still insists on a dialogue and an open debate to reveal what has really caused the economic crisis. Venezuela remains a country under siege by US and EU sanctions.
People have marched in solidarity with the government of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro in Barbados on Saturday, outside the United States Embassy in that country. They demanded peace in the Caribbean region. Singing "Hands Off Venezuela," the demonstrators carried signs expressing their solidarity with their fellow Caribbean nation. Senior academics, lawyers, and social activists spoke at the event. The demonstration sought to show strong opposition to U.S. interventionism in the global south.
The question that we must consider as well, if Venezuela grew only bananas, do you think that all this invasion will be a consideration on behalf of the United States? But Venezuela has one of the world's largest deposits of oil. It has coltan, it has gold, it has diamond, it has water, it has wood. Venezuela is minerally rich, and that is the prime reason, as declared by the presidential secretary himself, gaining Venezuela's resources will be good for the American economy.
Also, demonstrators in Lebanon have gathered in support of the government of President Nicolas Maduro. Fittingly, they expressed their solidarity with the Bolivarian Revolution in Bolivar Square in the capital city of Beirut. Some Venezuelan flags were also seen in yellow-vest mobilizations in Paris. In a tweet, Nicolas Maduro expressed his appreciation of the internationalism between peoples. Also, Bolivia's President Evo Morales has expressed his rejection of European countries' subordination to the White House's interventionist policies. On Twitter, he said that humanitarian aid is based in the principles of neutrality and non-intervention. He added that the concept was born in Europe, and that's why it's surprising and painful to see how some Europeans support U.S. intervention. He noted that in 2003, France and Germany opposed to invasion in Iraq, and that's why their support for intervention in Latin America isn't understandable. Morales asked how they can recognize someone who accepts a military intervention from the U.S. in their own country. The Venezuelan economist Pascualina Curcio has been invited to participate at the International Book Fair in Havana, Cuba. While there, she condemned war aggression and violation of international rights by the United States.
That Maduro is illegitimate, which is fake. He was elected by 6.5 million Venezuelan people. More than 9 million participated in elections and 15 political parties. They were transparent elections with the same electoral system used for the National Assembly in contempt. Well, this is the main lies. And the other lie is that we are in a humanitarian crisis because they need to justify entering Venezuelan territory to the world using alleged humanitarian aid. We don't need it. We only need them to lift the sanctions, the coercive unilateral measures, the financial blockade, the commercial embargo to stop the attacks on our money and hiding food and medicines. That's what we need.
This week, Uruguay hosts an international summit on the political situation in Venezuela. 2 meetings were held, one by the Montevideo mechanism between Mexico, Uruguay, Bolivia, and CARICOM. This group agreed on a declaration calling for dialogue and non-intervention in Venezuela. The other group, known as the International Contact Group, and backed by the European Union, held its own meeting and called for snap elections in Venezuela and for the government to allow humanitarian aid to enter the country. Our correspondent in Montevideo, Madeline Garcia, brings us more.
The European Union leads the International Contact Group, which is made up of 11 countries. The president of Uruguay led their meeting on Thursday, making clear that all proposals must be made under the basis of international law and of non-interference, believing that what's happening in Venezuela today can happen to any nation in the world.
The biggest dilemma Venezuela currently has is between peace and war. That's why we call for serenity with all involved and caution the international community about their actions.
Even when the goal of the International Contact Group was not to impose solutions to Venezuelans, like Federica Mogherini initially said, in the same speech, she went back on her words.
The goal is not to have a direct negotiation, but to join a democratic solution through free and transparent snap elections.
Snap elections and humanitarian aid were the main points of the final document, which came to be after a 5-hour-long meeting. Bolivia, Mexico, and the 14 countries from CARICOM didn't sign precisely because they refused to interfere in Venezuela's internal affairs.
Mexico can't support political interference in other countries. We support dialogue between the parts involved in order to find a peaceful and democratic way to put an end to this situation, without the use of force.
These elections are not part of Venezuela's constitution, and their proposal is in line with attempts at interference, which Uruguay tried to resolve right away.
The solution to the Venezuela situation can be fixed, as long as there can be talk of elections. We are not placing the limits, dates, or preconditions. I think this is an issue of Venezuela, and there is a line between interference and cooperation. We want to cooperate. If Venezuelans want elections, they have to be carried out. If they want to find out another way without elections, then they shouldn't be carried out.
Bolivia proposed that instead of humanitarian aid, economic sanctions could be lifted, ending the economic blockade by the US and the European Union.
There's a difficult economic situation, but we have to acknowledge that the economic crisis is getting worse because of the economic blockade that other countries have started. And since humanitarian aid is being offered, they should also lift the economic blockade that Venezuela is suffering under.
As the meeting was underway, several Uruguayan social organizations raised their voices on rejection to the ongoing group. Both the Montevideo Mechanism and the International Contact Group concur on rejecting military actions in Venezuela, even when there are differences in the subject of elections. They also concur that dialogue is the solution to solve the situation.
A study published by the Latin American Geopolitical Strategical Center shows that the international financial blockade against Venezuela has been the main cause of the country's economic situation.
Experience has shown that attacks on the economic and productive capacity of a nation are part of the broad array of options which imperialism uses when attempting to assert themselves on a sovereign country. Venezuela is no exception, as was made clear by the former U.S. ambassador in Caracas, William Brownfield.
At this time, the best solution would be to accelerate the collapse, even if it produces a period of higher suffering for months or maybe years.
A report published this Friday by the Latin American Geopolitical Strategic Center emphasizes the importance of the financial sector in strangling the economy of the country. In the case of Venezuela, the economic boycott has had very important consequences. Just in the period 2013 to 2017, the boycott involved a loss of $350 billion in the production of goods and services, figures that are equivalent to approximately between $12,000 and $13,400 for each Venezuelan citizen. Also, society was suffocated of $22.5 billion annually as a result of a deliberate strategy of international financial isolation. The situation has been frequently denounced by President Nicolás Maduro.
The people of Venezuela have suffered painful social injuries caused by a criminal commercial and financial blockade that has been aggravated by the disposal and the theft of our financial resources and assets in countries aligned with this onslaught.
The economic sanctions, the international boycott, and its consequences are elements very well known by the Venezuelan people.
The blockades against us isn't a secret. You cannot say a lie is the truth. The United States has blockaded us.
In the framework of the coup d'etat underway in Venezuela, the strategy chosen by the Venezuelan opposition in Washington has been to press the constitutional government through alleged humanitarian aid to fight the economic crisis that they themselves have stimulated.
It is shameful cynicism. It's atrocious that those who prevent us from buying medicine on the global market for 30 million people, who don't let us purchase food on the global market for 30 million people, come here and say that they have humanitarian aid for Venezuela.
This is what the Venezuelan economy has been facing in the middle of the attempted self-confessed coup supported by the government of the United States, which has attempted to create the conditions to justify an eventual military intervention.
We'll be back in a minute. Stay with us. Welcome back. The Haitian President Jovenel Moïse has reached out to protesting citizens and the opposition calling for dialogue. Protesters are demonstrating against suspected corruption and embezzlement of funds. The president said he is working hard to boost the food supply in the country. At least 10 people have died in recent demonstrations.
We went to elections. A part of the population voted. I am president. I am ready to speak to all my brothers and sisters about the difficulties the country is facing. To my brothers and sisters in the opposition, the door is open so as to reach a solution.
Chile is struggling with forest fires in the southern region of Araucanía, and the government has stepped up its efforts. A supertanker plane, soldiers, and members of National Forest Corporation have all been deployed to combat fires. Around 13,000 hectares have been burned this week. The government has declared a state of emergency in some parts of the country. Meanwhile, in the north of Chile, floods have taken 9 lives already. Calama City, in the region most known for the Atacama Desert, has suffered severe damage. The strong rains started 4 days ago, destroying homes with the water sweeping cars away. In Mexico, well-known journalist Jesus Ramos Rodriguez was murdered Saturday morning in the Emiliano Zapata municipality in the south of this country. Our correspondent in Mexico City, Pablo Perez, has the details.
Once again, a journalist has been the victim of violence. This time, it was Jesus Ramos alias Chuchin, a radio journalist in the southern state of Tabasco, who lost his life in an attack in the early hours on Saturday in the Zapata municipality. Ramos was having breakfast with some colleagues when suddenly an armed person entered the restaurant and shot him in cold blood. He is the second journalist killed this year. Let's remember that during the Peña Nieto presidency, which lasted for 6 years, 47 people in the media were killed. In the majority of cases, they were victims of violence because of their profession. It's been related to their activity with regard to organized crime and authorities, or when they are talking about the interests of organized crime. That's when these attacks have taken place. Unfortunately, they remain unpunished. Giving more protection to journalists is a challenge for the AMLO administration. It's a vocation that has been so violently attacked in recent years.
We thank Pablo for that report. An attorney general in Argentina is being investigated for extortion in the notebooks case into corruption in the country. Carlos Stornelli has been linked with bribes to employers, along with his collaborator, lawyer Marcelo D'Alessio. The judicial process took a turn when audiovisual material in which D'Alessio appeared to receive money from a businessman emerged. After 2 years of street protests, strikes, community meetings, and pressure on lawmakers, Brazilian unions defeated illegitimate President Michel Temer's pension reform proposal. Finance Minister Paulo Guedes has a new proposal which will cut minimum benefits in half and require 40 years of contributions. Metallurgical Workers Union President Wagner Santana explains what these reforms will mean for Brazilian workers.
After 2 years of street protests, strikes, community meetings, and pressure on lawmakers, the Brazilian unions defeated illegitimate President Michel Temer's pension reform proposal. Now Finance Minister Paulo Guedes has a new proposal which will cut minimum benefits in half and require 40 years of contribution. In São Bernardo, an industrial suburb of São Paulo, ABC Metal Workers Union President Wagner Santana explains what these reforms would mean for Brazilian workers.
The Brazilian worker makes pension contributions on average 9 months per year. It would take 53 years for them to make 40 effective years of contributions, which removes the possibility of people to retire.
In front of an auto plant in São Bernardo, workers express their worries about the new proposal and talk about what needs to be done to stop it.
If this goes through, unfortunately, it would lead to discrimination against the elderly.
If we are going to unite in the struggle against this, we have to go beyond the factories and bring this debate to society so that everyone can get involved in the important fight against these reforms.
Back in the Metallurgical Workers Union headquarters, where Lula began his career, Wagner Santana explains how Brazilian unions and social movements plan to fight these reforms.
We are holding a General Assembly of the working class on February 20th, here in Sao Paulo. And from there, if necessary, we will call a general strike and paralyze the factories against the pension reforms. We will do it.
Brian Mir, Telesur, São Bernardo.
Family and friends have laid the body of Flamengo goalkeeper Christian Esmerillo to rest, one of 10 teenagers killed in a deadly fire on Friday. The boys, all aged between 14 and 16, were killed when a fire swept through the Flamengo training center on the outskirts of Rio de Janeiro. Although Brazilian clubs are famous for producing some of the world's best players that have been criticized for the lack of care and security they provide their young footballers.
How can a club as important as Flamengo allow kids to sleep in containers? It's absurd. Brazil has to do something to stop this, so people stop dying with nobody being pushed.
Now to Africa. The African Union Summit is underway in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. It is being held at a time when the continent is tasked with strengthening peace and development. Our correspondent Matuba Maktije gives us a report.
Egypt has taken over the chairmanship at the African Union 32nd Ordinary Session. President Abdel al-Sisi takes over from Paul Kagame of Rwanda. President Kagame leaves behind his campaign trying to strengthen the AU. Member states, although, have been resisting reforms that he came up with that would they saw them as giving the organization power and sovereignty over them. Now, Egypt is taking over the reins after its own problems with the AU. It was at odds with the AU back in 2013 when it was suspended after the country's army deposed Mohamed Morsi, who was the first democratically elected president. But now all that is behind in the past, and commentators say Egypt is very likely to focus on peace and security. As you may remember, Egypt is spearheading peace talks in Libya and in the Middle East, and so AU Chair President al-Sisi is in a strategic position at this point to advance those peace talks. But now with a mother body like the AU without real power, so to say, over member states, Egypt will have to be creative in dealing with the aftermath of the DR Congo disputed elections. As you know, that is still causing tensions even now. And the tensions again in the Sahel region and terrorism in several countries on the African continent. And the irony of this summit actually is that it's held in a country with the most internally displaced people in the world. That's Ethiopia. And so Egypt has its work cut out for it. Back to you.
Time for a second break. We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back. The Ebola outbreak in the east of the Democratic Republic of Congo has killed around 500 people within 6 months. The health minister said there were still difficulties in trying to contain the spread of the virus due to crime and conflict in the area.
We still have an epicenter, a hotspot around Katwa, a zone right next to Butembo. There is a specific issue here. It is the area in which there has been the most hostility, reticence and urban crime, which has a negative impact on the conduct of activities.
The Syrian Democratic Forces have begun what it calls the final battle to oust the Islamic State group from the final bit of territory it holds in eastern Syria. Backed by airstrikes by the US-led coalition, the Kurdish Arab Alliance has in recent months cornered the Islamic State group. After a pause of more than a week to allow civilians to flee, the SDF says Saturday it had resumed the fight to seize the last 4 square kilometers of territory in the east of the country, still outside of their control.
This battle will be sealed in the coming days. Most of the terrorists in Baghouz are foreign. In the last 2 months, most who handed themselves in or were arrested were foreign.
Thousands of right-wing demonstrators gathered in the Spanish capital, Madrid, on Sunday to protest against the ruling Socialist Party. They flooded the streets with the Spanish flags to condemn negotiations with pro-independence Catalan government. The demonstration was led by leading right-wing parties in Spain, PP, Ciudadanos, and Vox. After the protest was called, the Spanish President Pedro Sánchez ruled out agreeing to a referendum on Catalan independence. Former President of Catalonia, Carles Puigdemont, has spoke about the protests on social media. He said that more people demonstrated in favor of Catalan independence from Spain than for a unity of the Spanish state. The protest comes at a delicate moment as the trial of the leaders of the Catalan independence movement begins this week. And before we end the show, make sure you tune in every Sunday for a new original documentary series by Telesur called After War. The series recounts the impact that United States interventions have had in countries across the world. The first installment will air after this edition of From the South, so stay with us.
So no, the war is not finished, absolutely not.
So they can try this book and then they cancel it.
And we come to the end of this news brief. You can find this and many other stories in our website at telesurenglish.net. And don't forget to join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Jose Daniel Lopez. Thank you for watching.